This is Earl Nightingale with Insight. I've been rereading my copy of the excellent book by John W. Gardner, Self-Renewal. You might want to get a copy for your home library. I know you'd enjoy reading it and get a lot out of it. In writing of the need for self-renewal, John Gardner says one of the reasons why mature people are apt to learn less than young people is that they are willing to risk less. Learning is a risky business, and they do not like failure. In infancy, when the child is learning at a truly phenomenal rate, a rate he will never again achieve, incidentally, he's also experiencing a shattering number of failures. Watch him. See the innumerable things he tries and fails, and see how little the failures discourage him. With each year that passes, he'll be less blithe about failure. By adolescence, the willingness of young people to risk failure has diminished greatly, and all too often, parents push them further along that road by instilling fear, by punishing failure, or by making success seem too precious. By middle age, most of us carry in our heads a tremendous catalog of things that we have no intention of trying again because we tried them once and failed, or tried them once and did less well than our self-esteem demanded. One of the virtues of formal schooling is that it requires the student to test himself in a great variety of activities that are not of his own choosing. But the adult can usually select the kinds of activities on which he allows himself to be tested, and he takes full advantage of that freedom of choice. He tends increasingly to confine himself to the things that he does well, and to avoid the things in which he's failed or has never tried. In line with this, a friend of mine who works for a major airline told me that surveys have found that the great majority of people who say they don't like to fly have never been up in an airplane, and so they haven't the faintest idea as to whether or not they'd like flying, and they would in all likelihood enjoy it. John Gardner goes on to write, "We pay a heavy price for our fear of failure. It's a powerful obstacle to growth. It assures the progressive narrowing of the personality and prevents exploration and experimentation. There's no learning without some difficulty and fumbling. If you want to keep on learning, you must keep on risking failure all your life. It's as simple as that." When Max Planck was awarded the Nobel Prize, he said, "Looking back over the long and labyrinthine path which finally led to the discovery of the quantum theory, I am vividly reminded of Goethe's saying that men will always be making mistakes as long as they're striving after something." The mature, self-renewing person doesn't fear failure. He recognizes it as a concomitant, a perfectly natural part of learning and growing as a person. You might say that an adult's fear of making an error is in direct ratio to his immaturity as a human being. How are you doing in the courage to fail department? The only people who don't make mistakes are the people who never try anything new. And to my mind, that's the biggest mistake of all. I was invited recently to speak to a group of senior citizens. I couldn't make it. I was to be out of the city at that time, but I'm not sure I would have anyway. I can't, for some reason, see human creatures filing like docile sheep into a meeting billed for senior citizens. I find the term categorizing, demeaning, and patronizing. It's another attempt to use age, chronological age, as a determining factor in fitting people into pigeonholes. When Jack Benny turned 71 years of age, he decided to get an agent to handle his appearance contracts. One agent he approached on the idea felt that Jack was through and was just trying to cling to the business. The agent who did accept the offer, quite delightedly, cashed in to the tune of his commissions on $12 million worth of bookings before Jack Benny died at the age of 80. In the 9 years of his life, from 71 to 80, Jack Benny earned many times over what the average person earns in a lifetime. It gives one pause and raises the question, how old is old? When is a person through earning an excellent income by doing that which he or she most enjoys? In the case of Mr. Benny, a man much loved by all who knew him, his earnings remained at their peak until he died at the age of 80. Unusual case? Not really all that unusual. In the amount earned, yes, few people earn $12 million during their lives, let alone in 9 years. But the people who go right on doing their thing and reaping the rewards of their production until they reach the end of long lives are not all that scarce. The agent who thought Jack Benny was through missed out on perhaps $2 million by underestimating him. I wonder how many other people in our society are considered through at a time of their lives when they're still quite productive. Many of the most productive minds on earth are those of people who will never see 60 again. They don't need defending, and they don't need or want help from anybody. All they want is the freedom to go their own way in peace, and to see those people who come up with terms like senior citizen hanging from their necks over barbecue pits. Middle-aged is another one. When will we learn that the passing of a certain number of years has nothing whatever to do with anything at all, unless we've never developed the capacity to think, in which case we welcome such spurious identification, because it gives us the identity we weren't able to find for ourselves. We must separate time from talent and ability. Many people don't reach their peak until they reach 70 or so. Thousands of people have waited until they were 65 to launch an ambitious undertaking of some kind. Writers and other creative people often do their best work after passing 50. Will Durant sold a series of TV programs at the ripe old age of 91. Frank Lloyd Wright created the magnificent Guggenheim Museum at 89. Colonel Harlan Sanders was a comparative spring chicken when he sold the first of his Kentucky Fried franchises. He was in his 60s. And I knew a man who started a brand new business at 65, and before he died, saw it grow into a $300 million empire. How's that for a senior citizen? How about George Burns? What you do after 65 is your business. If you choose to sit on a beach or in the park and listen to your arteries harden, you have that right. Enjoy it. If you're ill and unable to do much of anything, try anyway. It's pretty difficult to incapacitate a human being who still has a mind. He or she will almost always find a way. So from where I sit, down with the term senior citizen. The only thing wrong with it is that it attempts to put miracles in bottles. You don't have to give up at 65. In fact, it can be the starting point of a long, interesting, and extremely rewarding career. It depends on how young your mind remains. That's the part that counts. Maybe I should have made that speech. What do we select as a gift for someone we love? It seems it's always a problem. Daniel Sugarman, a clinical psychologist, has 12 suggestions in his book, Priceless Gifts, How to Give the Best to Those You Love. He lists 12 suggestions that seem to work wonders if we can put them to use, and they can help us a great deal in the process. So here are the 12 gifts of the self. The first is the gift of time. Just being with someone can be a great comfort to that person. The second is the gift of a good example. Dan Sugarman points out that most people learn fundamental attitudes by observing other people. The third is the gift of acceptance. He suggests that people often begin to change when they realize they're being accepted for what they are. The fourth gift, idea for those who are so often busy and distracted these days, is the gift of privacy. That is, time of one's own. Too often we smother people with questions and demands on them and their time. Fifth is the gift of seeing the best in people. How can you see a fine picture of someone close to you when that person doesn't always seem to be so fine? Psychologists know that you'll see what you expect to see. And the sixth gift suggested is the gift of self-esteem, not crippling others by nagging or criticizing, especially those we love. That's a particularly tough one for millions of people every day. Dr. Sugarman suggests that the seventh gift might be the giving up of a bad habit. And number 8, the gift of self-disclosure. Bottling up feelings and resentments deprives the other person of truly knowing who you are. Dr. Sugarman's 9th gift idea is the gift of helping someone learn something new. It's an investment in his future happiness. And the 10th gift is the gift of really listening. Few of us know how to listen in an effective manner, he points out. The 11th is the gift of fun. Dr. Sugarman says that it's important to help those close to you to find fun in ordinary, small events. And finally, the 12th gift, letting others give to us. Surely one of the most important gift suggestions. When we let others give to us, he says, and when we can accept their gifts in a gracious and mature manner, we may be giving them one of the most important gifts of all. So there are the 12 priceless gifts to those we love. I remember the times when I was a youngster and I worked with my father. He let me participate, and particularly when he took me to lunch in a regular restaurant. Those were especially exciting times. As a result, I did the same thing with my kids. I helped them learn to handle the menus and order their own food with occasional suggestions. If we can augment our gift-giving by giving more of ourselves to those we love, all the time and in various ways, we will have a good chance of helping them and ourselves live happier, better lives. Khalil Gibran wrote, "You give but little when you give of your possessions. It is when you give of yourself that you truly give." The best executive or manager, whether in business, the professions, or at home, is the one who makes those in his charge feel important and needed. He's the person who gives others the impression that his success depends on them, that they're important. He also gives them the feeling that they can rely upon him to help in any situation, that he's a rock upon which they can lean if they need to. I had a pleasant and very rewarding experience some time back. I heard a talk given by Dr. Harry Levinson, formerly of the Menninger Clinic in Topeka, Kansas, and now of Harvard University. He gave the best definition of a manager and a parent I've ever heard. He said that the good manager, like the good parent, says to those in his charge, "You can become whatever you seriously want to become. My job is to help you become it. My job is to facilitate, to help you become that upon which you've set your heart and mind." Isn't that great? The job of the manager or parent is to help those in his charge to develop, to grow as persons, to reach fulfillment. The job of the good manager or parent is to let his people see the big picture. Any job, regardless of the company or industry, has within it the road to greatness, the key to everything a person could want for himself and his family. But all too often, the person with the job doesn't realize it. Let's say, for example, that a young person is working as a baggage handler for an airline. As a rule, his knowledge of the company he works for and the industry in which it operates is sharply limited. The odds are good that his horizons are limited to the airport where he works and the responsibilities of his own job. That's it. The good manager will hold regular meetings during which he will expose to these young people the opportunities that exist not just with that airline, although they are virtually unlimited, but within the entire air travel industry. And he will point out to them that with continuing education and training on the job and off, that by assiduous attention to their work and an unrelenting search for excellence, they can move up the ladder to the sort of jobs and income they want and need in the years ahead, and it's all within the job they presently have. The waitress or busboy in a restaurant, the worker on the loading dock of a trucking company or in a gas station, or in any job you can name, has a future limited only by how far he can see the opportunities in that line of business. Here's where the good manager comes in. He shows the way, and when he finds a willing, conscientious person, he helps him all he can. In this way, the manager grows in stature as he helps those below him. By helping others qualify for his own job, he forces himself even higher. He never pushes, pulls, or harangues. He never runs around grabbing people by the lapels, telling them to strive for great heights. He's concerned only with exposing the opportunities that lie ahead and insisting upon excellence in his own department. The people who work under him learn that doing their work in an average run-of-the-mill manner is not good enough. Soon, they take excellence for granted, and like their manager, begin to look for new and better, safer, faster, more efficient ways, more effective ways of doing the job. The people fortunate enough to work under this sort of manager grow as steadily and solidly as do the children with the right kind of parents. It is believed by many that one of the reasons why we have so many fat human beings lumbering about the landscape is because of well-meaning but misguided mothers, fathers, and grandparents who still hold to the old idea that children should eat everything on their plates. Human beings actually need a lot less food than most parents, and particularly grandparents, realize. The stomach of a normal adult is only about the size of your fist, and it doesn't take much to fill it. A child's stomach is even smaller. I can remember my mother and grandmother saying to me, "Now you eat every bit of that food. Don't you know there are millions of people who are starving in the world?" I naturally felt very bad about so many people going without food, but I could never figure out what that had to do with my eating more than I really wanted. In fact, it somehow seemed wrong for me to be eating so much when so many millions were starving. I would have gladly shared with anyone who could have taken some of the pressure off me. But parents who force their children, particularly when they're quite small, to eat more than they want to eat, make of mealtime an upsetting and unpleasant time instead of the wonderful and gratifying experience it should be. When any person eats more than he should, he's wasting food anyway, and at the same time, he's setting himself up to form habits that can, in later life, lead to overweight and all the medical and social problems connected with it. Children know when they've had enough to eat, and they should not be badgered or wheedled or intimidated in eating more. They should be permitted to stop eating right then and taken out of their high chairs, or to be permitted to leave the table. However, specialists agree that they should not be fed between meals. Having eaten perhaps very little, they will then be ravenous when the next mealtime comes around, and they will then eat well without coaxing. The important thing is that they eat a good, nutritious, well-balanced diet and don't eat the wrong things. As I said, mealtime should be looked forward to with a great deal of anticipation. But for countless thousands of children, it's dreaded as a time of wrangling and argument, of ranting and raving on the part of a well-meaning but mistaken parent who puts the emphasis on quantity. The child leaves his meal periods upset and shaken instead of happy and satisfied, and it's a shame. Again, if a youngster doesn't want to eat, let him wait until the next meal, but make sure he waits without eating anything in between. When the next mealtime comes around, chances are he'll eat everything you put in front of him. And if you're overweight, try eating the proper foods, the foods without oils and without sugars, without fat. 15 minutes later, you'll feel quite comfortable and proud of yourself to boot. We in the Western world are fortunate in having an abundance of good things to eat. But having an abundance doesn't mean that we have to eat it all at one sitting. And remember that kids know when they've had enough to eat. It's just too bad we're not as smart as they are. James Bryce said, 3/4 of the mistakes a man makes are made because he doesn't really know the things he thinks he knows. The other day I remembered something that happened a number of years ago in the office of my old friend, Dr. L.D. Pankey. It made a deep impression on me. I was looking at a picture of one of the classes he conducted each year for people of his profession from all over the world. In studying the photograph, I realized that I was seeing some of the same faces I'd seen in other photographs of earlier classes he'd held. So I said, I noticed many of the people who took your course a year ago took it again this year. What did you teach them this year that you didn't teach them last year? His reply surprised me. He said, nothing. I teach the same thing every year, not only in this country, but abroad as well. Oh, I add to it each year as I learn new things, but basically it's the same course every year. I was amazed. Do you mean that you teach the same things to the same people all over again? That's right, he answered. And seeing my surprise, he laughed and asked me a question that stopped me completely. He said, when you find your golf game isn't as good as you'd like it to be, or you suddenly find the ball isn't going where you want it to go, and you can't quite put your finger on what's wrong, what do you do? Well, I said, I go back to the pro for some lessons. That's right, he said. And what does he teach you? Does he teach you something new about the game, something you didn't know at some time before? Or does he merely remind you once again of the basic fundamentals that, if you'll but be guided by them, will result in your getting the kind of score you'll be happier with? Well, he had me. And it made me remember the old saying that we need reminding as much as we need educating. It applies to becoming good at anything. It's as important to living successfully as it is to playing a satisfactory game of golf or practicing medicine or dentistry. We need to be reminded from time to time, and the more regularly the better, of the basics, the fundamentals upon which everything else is built. The good home may not look different from all the other homes on the street, but its foundation followed the rules for any good foundation, and so did its construction. Do it right the first time, and it'll stand for as long as we need it. If we build our lives and what we do during our days on truth and justice, we'll live the kind of lives we can be proud of, that'll take us to the goals we seek in good time, without worry or frustration. But we do need reminding. You might remember that bit about the golf pro. He doesn't teach you anything new, but he reminds you of some of the basics you've forgotten and helps you rid yourself of some bad habits. Oliver Wendell Holmes said, a thought is often original, though you've uttered it 100 times. It's come to you over a new route by a new express train of association. And T.W. Higginson said, originality is simply a pair of fresh eyes. Have you ever thought about the fact that the people who seem to do so well in the world are the people who manage to overcome the fear of laughter, of ridicule? Anytime you attempt something in which you risk failure, you run the risk of having people laugh at you. Anytime you try something new, you run the same risk. A college professor worked many years on an invention. He tramped all over New England trying to interest capital in his device for making the human voice travel along a wire. The people laughed at him. It was, of course, plumb idiotic, they said, to suppose that the human voice could be carried along a wire and be heard for many miles, or even for a single mile. But our old friend Alexander Graham Bell could not be laughed out of it, and every time you pick up your telephone, you salute the man who stayed on course despite the laughter. Millions of people laughing in derision could not hurt us an iota, but we stand in mortal terror of it. Men and women who can prove themselves heroes in great crises tremble before derision. It's a strange quirk of human nature, and it's cost a great deal. It's changed the course of history of the world. Sometimes the price of laughter has meant the slamming of the door to fame and fortune, even immortality. Elias Howe invented the sewing machine, but it nearly rusted away before the American women stopped laughing about it and could be persuaded to make use of it. With their sewing done so quickly, they argued, what would they ever do with all their spare time? So a biographer painted a tragic picture. The man who had done more than any other to lighten the work of women was forced to borrow a suit of clothes on an occasion of a public appearance. Men are as bad as women when it comes to resisting new ideas. The typewriter had been a demonstrated success for years before businessmen could be persuaded to buy it. How could anyone have enough letters to write, they argued, to justify the investment of $100 in a writing machine? By the way, did you know that the first author to submit a typewritten book manuscript to his publisher was Mark Twain? Wouldn't you know it? Other inventions have had similar battles. Here's an extract from a notebook of Robert Fulton, who invented the steamship, who changed ships forever from sail to steam on the oceans of the world. He wrote, as I had occasion daily to pass to and from the shipyard where my boat was in progress, I often loitered near the groups of strangers and heard various remarks as to the object of this new vehicle. The language was uniformly that of scorn, sneer, or ridicule. The loud laugh often rose at my expense. The dry jest, the wise calculations of losses or expenditures, the dull repetition of Fulton's folly. Never did a single encouraging remark, a bright hope, a warm wish cross my path. Not once. The moral to all this is pretty clear. If we're to learn anything from history, and if we're to amount to much out of the ordinary, we have to rise above the fear of laughter, and it's not too difficult when you consider who's doing the laughing. Pythagoras was misunderstood, and Socrates was misunderstood, and Jesus was misunderstood, and Luther, and Copernicus, and Galileo, and Newton, and every pure and wise spirit that ever took flesh. To be great is to be misunderstood. So said Emerson. I was chatting with a psychologist and management consultant one day, and he happened to mention that he had conducted classes in prosperity. That is, he had tried to teach poor people how to become well-to-do, prosperous. How well he succeeded at that, I have no way of knowing, but I have little doubt that the subject can be taught. There are thousands of books on how I made a million in the stock market, or by raising chickens, or in real estate, or in mail order. It isn't so much the kind of business chosen or the line of work. It's possible to become prosperous in any line. It isn't what you do that's so important. It's more a matter, at least in the beginning, of your attitude. As the late Ernest Holmes once put it, prosperity doesn't just happen. It is first a state of mind. Do you remember Mike Todd's famous comment? He said, being broke is a temporary situation. Being poor is a state of mind. Surveys have indicated that most people equate happiness with enough money to live well. Other surveys have proved that people who are well-to-do are generally happier than poor people. Well, that makes sense. They have fewer money worries. But you run into a great deal of skepticism when you tell poor people that prosperity depends more on the state of mind than on anything else. Few other subjects are surrounded by as many myths, misinformation, and old wives' tales as is the subject of how to become prosperous. And my friend the psychologist told me that a series of questions can usually determine whether or not a person is going to make his mark financially. One is to ask the person how much money he intends to be worth by the time he's reached a certain age. This is followed by a question which asks how much money he wishes he could be worth by the same age. If the two figures are the same, if the person questioned intends to be worth the same amount he wishes he could be worth, chances are he'll make it. He's serious about it, and has the attitude that says, I will, not, oh, I wish, or I hope I will. As Ernest Holmes put it, are you interested in making money? In running your business successfully? In getting a better salary? Of course you are. You want to be prosperous, and this is only right and sensible. The plain, practical, everyday problem of money-making is a definite part of living, and the answer to it is summed up in these words. Prosperity awaits man's recognition and acceptance of it. Or it can be stated another way. Your financial success already exists, but it is waiting for you to see it and accept it as your own. Just decide on what's prosperity for you, and then head out, get busy. And it's usually a good idea to start where you are. There's possibly more opportunity lurking within your present environment and what you are now doing than you can even imagine. Once you create the proper mental attitude, the ideas you need will be attracted to you. They'll come right out of your own subconscious. Then, if your attitude is still right, you'll act on your ideas. But it all starts with the right attitude.